Alex Marquardt is out front in Kyiv tonight to begin our coverage. And Alex, what is the latest on the ground there tonight?
Aaron, we are seeing the beginning stages of this new Russian offensive, and so far it is not going well. One senior State Department official on Thursday said that it is very pathetic. We are getting that update on the fighting in Bakhmut from the White House, that city where for the past few months Ukraine has been locked in a fierce battle with Russian forces from the Wagner Group, made up of mercenaries and convicts. The White House's John Kirby saying that in December, 90% of the deaths from Wagner were convicts, a recruitment tool, he says, that shows no sign of abating. Just a week from the first anniversary of the Russian invasion, this is, according to President Volodymyr Zelensky, the toughest fight in Ukraine right now, in the eastern city of Bakhmut. Called a meat grinder by both sides, Russian troops from the Wagner mercenary group, most of them convicts, continue to be sent in, wave after wave, to their deaths.
Men that he just plucked out of prisons and threw on the battlefield with no training, no equipping, no organizational command, just throw them into the fight. 90% killed were convicts. We believe that Wagner continues to rely heavily on these convicts in the Bakhmut fighting, and that doesn't show any signs of abating.
The battle laying bare the stark divisions on the Russian side. With Wagner chief Evgeny Prigozhin openly blasting Russia's official military leadership, saying they manage soldiers from beauty salons and country clubs, arguing that if there were more of his private troops, they would be halfway across Ukraine by now. The toll has been so severe on the Russian side that, according to Ukrainian officials, regular troops have been backfilling Wagner with mechanized infantry and tank units supported by artillery and aircraft. If Russia were to take Bakhmut, it would change little, but be a symbolic victory as Ukraine struggles to keep them at bay. President Zelensky today urging world leaders at the Munich Security Conference to speed up their military aid, comparing the fight to Goliath, taking on David and his sling.
We need to hurry up. We need the speed of our agreements, speed of our delivery to strengthen our sling, speed of decisions to limit Russian potential.
That Russian potential is still significant, with hundreds of thousands of mobilized troops believed to be in reserve, and Russian President Vladimir Putin able to call up more to offset his enormous losses. Now, according to the U.S. State Department, numbering over 200,000 Russian dead and wounded. We should note that Ukraine has also suffered tremendous losses, both in this fight in Bakhmut and all across the country over the past year, but Ukraine and the U.S. are less transparent about those numbers. Now, the United States would like to see Ukraine shift its focus from Bakhmut to a looming counteroffensive in the south that would be made up of some newly trained troops and armored vehicles. Today, we learned that 635 Ukrainian troops have just finished a 5-week training course at a U.S. base in Germany. A second phase has now started with 710 new Ukrainian troops. Much of the training focused on combined arms and maneuvers with those armored vehicles that the U.S. believes will be critical in taking back territory from Russia. Aaron?
Alex, thank you very much from Kyiv tonight. And out front now, Michael Bucherkiw, the senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He is based in the southern Ukrainian city of Odessa, and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Thanks so much to both of you. Colonel Leighton, let me just start with you with what Alex was saying, that Russia is struggling to get a new offensive going, a battered military, the tremendous losses, obviously, from Wagner being a part of that. What would a massive Russian offensive look like with the military that they have now, presuming that they have tens of thousands or more troops that they're about to commit to it?
Yeah, Aaron, that's a really interesting question. In normal times, you would say a Russian offensive would look like a huge mass of soldiers going forward with lots of tanks, helicopters, and air support. The air support is definitely lacking, at least it has been lacking so far. You also have a situation where there are really problems backfilling the losses that the Russians have had that Alex mentioned in his report. So what you're going to see probably is this attempt to, like you see in Bakhmut and in other places along the front, where there are going to be these probes that are moving forward, but those probes are not going to be effective unless they find certain weaknesses in the Ukrainian lines. But generally speaking, it's going to be an attempt with a lot of artillery, with a lot of movements forward, but those movements are going to be stopped pretty much at the front line at this point.
So, Michael, Colonel Leighton says, you would have a lot of air support, and there hasn't been that thus far. That's true. But we do understand that, today in the meeting with Alexander Lukashenko, Lukashenko promised Putin that Belarus is ready to produce fighter jets for Russia. We know from Western intelligence that they have been putting a lot of fighter jets on Belarusian bases. And U.S. intelligence is saying, or Western intelligence is warning of a massive air assault. So it's unclear how that would play in, but all of those pieces are in place. And you say Russia's currently using balloons in some way related to this. What more do you know about that?
Right. So from Ukrainian media and other sources, this is basically a cheap Russian tactic to distract Ukrainian radar, to confuse its air defense systems, and to lure the Ukrainians into wasting ammunition on these balloons. But I think what we're seeing is another attempt by Russia to ratchet things up. And I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but I think what we're looking at right now, Aaron, is another attempt by Russia taking advantage of that gap between when pledges of Western tanks were made and when the tanks actually arrive, to do another major assault from the north, from the east, and from the south. It could be devastating to Ukraine, but being in Ukraine as long as I have, I know that the resilience there is very strong. The Western weaponry is coming, but Putin, I think, is a man who cannot accept defeat. And I think it was Mitch McConnell who said today that unless he's pushed back, we can expect not only other dictators to be emboldened, but this to turn into a very, very expensive war, because we will continue to fight this from many, many more fronts.
Yeah, and what this offensive could look like, of course, is the crucial question. And Colonel Leighton, to this point that Michael's making about the weaponry coming in, you've got a bipartisan group in Congress, right? He mentions Senator McConnell calling on the Biden administration to send F-16 fighter jets to Kyiv as soon as possible. Now, there's a gap of time, as Michael points out, right? Tanks are promised. Those Abrams tanks are not coming anytime soon. They're just not ready. Biden has resisted the F-16s. And he said, it would seriously escalate the situation. This has been from the very beginning. Did the U.S. wait too long on this front for the F-16s, for air?
Yes, it absolutely did, Aaron. And, what should have happened is about 2 months into this war, starting from February of last year, we should have started the training of F-16 pilots, or at least the transition of Ukrainian pilots into F-16s. That would have then given the Ukrainians time to get familiar with the platform, be able to employ the platform, and also get familiar with the avionics. Plus, it would also have allowed them to train maintenance troops, as well as the intelligence forces and radar operators, in order to effectively employ this weapon system in a combined arms manner. And that would be the kind of thing that would have been necessary. So at this point, as Michael points out, we're going to be racing against the clock in several different ways, and that's going to be very tough on the Ukrainians.
And Michael, all in, the U.S. has spent about $100 billion pledged in aid to Ukraine. Zelensky said he's going to appoint a new leader to the anti-corruption agency there. He's fired. Now, there's been two sort of big purges, one last summer and one recently, of officials for corruption, most recently tied to war supplies procurement. So how big of an issue is this?
Absolutely huge, both inside and outside of Ukraine. Outside of Ukraine, the world is watching how Ukraine is conducting itself militarily, but also spending these billions in aid. And they have to be spent very carefully. So these allegations come at a very bad time. And by the way, they were uncovered by Ukrainian journalists. Secondly, I speak to a lot of Ukrainians, both inside and outside of Ukraine. And the other one thing they want, other than Russia being completely pushed out of Ukraine and defeated, is that war on corruption to continue to the very end. It will take some time, but I think that the Ukrainians who have, for example, left Ukraine, millions of them, especially the young ones, the ones in high tech, for example, want to come back to Ukraine, which is built back better, where corruption is no longer a daily fact of life. So Zelensky, credit to him for cracking down as he did, but there are still a lot of officials, Aaron, who were allowed to gracefully resign. So he really has to come down hard on this.
All right.